All right, a couple more notes about the state. It's kind of like all senses are a bit more honed in because the attention is more on the mind and body in the moment instead of everything else around. And you keep up with the mind's train of thought while also listening to the body's reaction more often. That also does include hearing, but you try not to pay too much attention to it. Um, and there's also a sense that you can kind of just select in that mode, because you're fully in attention of your senses. You kind of select your state. You, since you're fully aware and paying attention to all of it at the same time, it's as if that very action puts your hand on the controller and you can kind of push the buttons, just going, okay, I want to state a bit more energy. What would it feel like? What would I need? And you start, the answers that you kind of receive, they're more of a sense, a feeling, not necessarily a thought. You might ask the question as a thought or out loud. Doesn't matter, you choose. And you'll get a feeling as a response. And that's what you kind of want to keep hone an eye on. What's the feeling that comes right after? And you pay attention to it because it goes real fast. But then you're just able to surf from thought to thought to thought to thought and develop a whole idea in that state. It's just how fast you're able to keep up with how fast it's coming in. And yeah, it's a skill you keep just growing. You're also in your focus, your pinpoint focus on the positive. Completely pinpoint focus on the positive, on what's fun about whatever you're observing, sensing. So, because you're outside of the mind at this point, yeah, as you're observing both, you're kind of outside of it a bit more. You can still hear it, but you're looking at it from a different point of view. You're listening to it, observing it, its analysis and everything, its terminologies and definitions. And upon just listening, it's kind of like you just put your hands on a controller. It's interesting. It's really fucking cool. You're like, okay, do I want that? No, not really. Okay, let's do a bit of a cleanup job, a bit of a QTE to clean up that old memory or belief that I didn't necessarily choose. Would I choose this? No, not really. Okay, let's cautiously choose this. Let's reframe that. Cautiously knowing and cautiously knowing the consequences over time, because you don't know. Of course, you wouldn't. All right. It's like certain people don't necessarily the consequence. They don't necessarily know the consequence of grief, but it'll fuck with your body. No, meaning griefing. Griefing, better term. Holding resentment. Yeah, griefing, like the ghetto term, but doesn't really apply. This would be more resentment. A resentment that you kind of hold for too long. It's your body feeling it over and over and over. So you're the only one that's suffering from it. Okay, yeah, then you might act and then make other people suffer, but you're holding at least 90% of it. Oh, yeah, I guess that would happen if it overflows. I guess it's a theory, but if it's held, kind of like indoctrinated to be held, then Yeah, at one point it would overflow, and I guess you'd naturally act on others. That would suck. Stuff that used to happen back in the days, we had more, again, Wild West type of situation, that kind of stuff. Because eventually people just got driven mad by the state that it was back then. Now it's progressively gotten much better, you know. But it's kind of like realizing, okay, yeah, there could have been a state of overflowing that kind of emotion, creating this kind of psychological profile or state in a person, you know. Have a person live more one heck of a shitty day for an entire year, and yeah, especially with some of the conditions that there was at the time, less distraction, less entertainment, I should mean, ways to cool off, yeah, and distraction from events. Anyway, little theory, possibly works, maybe not, maybe, who knows. Okay, also another thing, whenever doing arts and craft or well, anything in that zone, whenever you're in the midst of doing it, always kind of keep track of that internal conversation. What's really cool is you start figuring out various little tips that you would kind of overlook if you did too fast. And once you acknowledge that those tips are there, or you acknowledge their existence, you start noticing them happening more and more in your art and your craft and the things you're looking for. It's part of the whole process, but being conscious and aware of it kind of speeds it up because you're much more aware for the kind of signs and signals around that specific, let's say, craft. And it becomes really amazing because uh, you start seeing the process in action for minor little things, maybe new moves, new process, new ideas, new sets of steps for your specific style or specific work. And this even expands to more of an acknowledgement that that is the process, the continuous expansion process. At the same time, you kind of hold the reins on that process since you know your own unique internal representation of it as you've been keeping up with the dialogue. It's as if since you know your internal dialogue by the palm of your hand, you've been keeping up, okay? You understand where each and every thought and reasoning kind of leads. This kind of also gives you insights or access to insights because after a while, you're so used to it it becomes familiar. You're able to travel through that kind of thought mechanism and thought stream really rapidly because you've been practicing it for a while and you've been paying attention to each and every step, not in an obsessive method, but just playful method, just soft, passively. You don't put any kind of needs. Then, upon you just taking the time to do it consciously at that point and repeat it, you become faster in it. And with this speed, what kind of becomes interesting is you no longer go through it procedurally, but you kind of just go through it naturally in fast movement, fast rhythm. And in that fast rhythm, there's much more chance of you getting insights and awareness because you're going at high speed, high thought speed. There's a times where you're going to create blends, mixes of everything that you've kind of learned. And as you're already in this very fast creative mode, you won't have the mind to butt in. That's why flow state is referred to in a single term, but there's multiple terms for it. The more aware you are of these states, and the more you can just bring those up at any point. But yeah, flow state is one of the ways you can describe that. But there's various states, there's various other definitions you could label that under for the various contexts and situations and various, not just arts and craft, but other things in life, even sports or reactions. So it's quite cool to just be able to, spot these things about the state and just let it flow cautiously, just having the hands on the control and going, okay, this is how I get into flow state, boop, 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 and then doing it. and seeing if you can apply it or how can you apply it in various other states or other mediums. Yeah, there we go. All right, something that came up was another type of process, or maybe a deeper inquiry in the process of processing trauma, you know? So, when you're about to process a trauma, you kind of look at that weird ass folder that you don't necessarily have much info about. You just know that it's something, it's like a habit that just keeps nagging at you or makes you react a very certain way. So, and you'll know. So at that point, a key thing is always looking into it as the observer, not as the hard drive itself. You're the one clicking on, you've got the mouse and keyboard, you're clicking on the folder, okay? So as you're doing this consciously, remember that consciously as well. Don't overtell yourself, but remembering it consciously really helps you. You open that folder and you start kind of fishing around for the emotion of the moment or the image of the moment related to that. So, if it's a current habit that may have been caused by a prior trauma, then from the current habit, you have some kind of a word for it. That you can kind of link up to the early definition of the early hard drive. So, the initial time that it would have been placed. But again, you didn't necessarily have the entirety of the definition of the said word. So, which is why it's much easier to track it down via emotion than to simply go with words. You can kind of flush it out with, or flesh it out with words afterward, but you gotta watch out. Sometimes words won't necessarily match the exact emotion, and that's the little game that's being played right now. So, as you find those initial details, you start you might start reliving the situation, but then you stop remembering you're the observer. So the mind might trigger again a video pop-up with the exact same emotion as then. You stop, you're the observer, you understand and accept how it saw it then with its level of consciousness at that point, but you're at a much different level of consciousness now, much more understanding, reasoning, and again, logic and experience. So when you go back in there, you understand the little one's context, your context at that time, because you didn't know, you didn't necessarily have anything kind of tied to that. It just happened. And that's the thing. Those folders are kind of created on the spot. It just reaction, this is that. The next word that you kind of link up to it is what happened after. There's the word that's kind of happening prior, that leading up to the event. You might even see the event, like the video event, blank out when the event happens. So it doesn't really try to relive the pain, even though it tries to do it at times. You know, the mind does that from time to time. It's really funny. But when you see it and you give it that compassion and understanding, okay, I understand how that version of consciousness at that time saw it. And you also give, and this is the master key, you give that forgiveness to the other party or whoever, whatever was involved in that. You must give that forgiveness, because, or else it's the feeling of separation within yourself stays. Whenever you resent someone, the feeling of separation is always within, because we're all connected via soul. So it doesn't matter if it's a different name, that's mind and body, we're just all souls, so you'll still feel it. That's why, and the forgiveness happens when you understand the context of, okay, back then they also had lesser levels of consciousness, but expand that not only to individual, but as a whole society, because that's the evolution of people, in general. Like, we have better and better mannerism over time and years that this planet has gone through. Of course, we're no longer fighting wars or family duels and all of that. So when you understand that context, and all of it kind of brought you to this moment, meaning their actions that they've learned from, again, you play that tape again and again, because as soon as you understand that concept, your life is just sky high, free. Okay, and that's the power of repetition as well. If you keep repeating something, you'll understand it to a core, and you won't even need to repeat it. The understanding is just going to pop up within single seconds. But you got to get over the hurdle of doing your 20 reps or 50 reps every time the subject kind of comes up with, the trauma or anything else. But I swear to you, as soon as you start that process, you'll beat it. Even if you kind of take your time and pace, you'll beat it because you've set it out as an intention. And that's one of the key things that you can just um, input in your brain. It's kind of like an input code, and you just say, okay, my intention is to beat this trauma. All right, it's done. Might take long, but you'll follow the impulse and you'll get to it. And I swear, it just works. It's really and to the degree that you stay detached from the hard drive when you do that, and give that forgiveness, because the same compassion is going off to you as, at the same time, being in their shoes and having that level of consciousness with the world's consciousness at that time, you're doing the same thing, because guess what, they learned it from a prior context. You get to that and you're like, oh right, they had it worst. But now we're at this great point where, okay, there's no more of this. Okay, they had it worse, they had it worse. We're like, okay, yeah, everyone's doing fine now, really. Huh. And it's because, again, cyclical nature of it all. Whatever happened then led to more question, more people asking for answers, and different kind of answers coming in, answers being pulled in, different solutions being created out of all of that, and then the cycle continues. Expansion, evolution of humankind, How'd you get your phone? Well, someone wanted to figure out, how do I make a phone that's portable and that's not huge? you know and you can notice in the last 30 or 40 years the expansion just went rapidly. 30 or 40 years, maybe more than that, 60 or 70 years, the expansion just went rapidly. It's amazing. So now we're at a point where, okay, technology is at this point, we also have consciousness that's really quite high, and we're no longer at a point where we're fighting each other to say who's right on religion, because it never, again, Babel's tower. We're not at this point anymore. There's still some people doing it around, but majoritarily, planet-wise, we're not fighting like that anymore. It's no longer kingdoms against kingdoms, So we're sharing that kind of information, and we're saying, oh shit, multiple things connecting, including this kind of tech. So when it comes to your trauma, you'll give that forgiveness. You'll accept the context, you know, because you're seeing it from your now point of consciousness, which is much more expanded, and you'll forgive whoever was involved, and you also thank them because it got you to this point of listening to this kind of stuff and figuring, just literally how to use the remote controller for your brain and do what you want. And also understanding this aspect of separation. Oh boy, that would be a podcast on its own. But it's really simple. It's just that there's multiple nuances of separation. But it's either hating on yourself or hating someone else. The separation feeling has its different nuances on both, but it's still the same feeling, nuances of the same feeling. So there's something to that, and to the degree that you kind of play with that and figure that out on your own, you start realizing, yeah, wow, interconnectedness, I see. And you even start feeling the subtle nuances of that. When, like, subtle nuances, example would be if I criticize, let's say, a popular artist in the industry, let's say, well, I'm going to feel subtle nuances of it, but not as strong as if I criticize, let's say, somebody that I know directly. And then that's not as strong as criticizing, let's say, myself, And depending on what's still on the hard drive, beliefs and value, that would not be as strong as criticizing God, in a sense. If, back old school, if I was still old school me in Christian school, in that sense, like way, way back, then that would have been a lot more separation. And even talking about that time, what would be worse separation would be to be told that you are disconnected from that. That's ultimate separation. And you'll fucking feel it, because it's like, well, no, you're not separated from yourself. What the fuck? And again, cyclical nature of it all. Certain schools didn't necessarily understand the whole message and blah, 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 blah. But hey, that's why we pull in information, and Planet's going fucking fine with this. So it's cool. Wow. I love this. Like consciousness just blasts shit your way when you ask for it. And it's really fun to kind of share with people, try to make it as general as possible. And also just these little excerpts here and there. It's quite fun. It's just remembering, crap, gotta upload this. Don't let it run until all night, or else in the morning it's just gonna cut off. That should tend to happen. All right, next bit. I think another extra note about this aspect of cleaning up, and again, chalk it up to the whole aspect of balance, but it's kind of like a fine point between you look into whatever trauma with the intention of making sure that the thought doesn't necessarily come back with the same kind of memory, instead of making sure that the thought is kind of completely destroyed. You can kind of feel something different from that, from those two intentions. And with the latter one, when you kind of focus on, or I mean, when you kind of focus simply on making sure that it doesn't come back, the idea is with full understanding that your brain, you're not your mind, that your mind tends to bring up memories for, safety. So it kind of brings fear or old patterns without you necessarily knowing. And that ultimately it does its best, but it's this whole aspect of survival. There's multiple theories behind that. Maybe there's a link to parenting as well, depending on the kind of stuff that you've heard as well. But there's also theories of it being a default primary thing, yet pushed a bit further nowadays. So, but it'll do whatever it does to keep you in an aspect of survival. And if it's if it's a thought that just keeps coming back over and over and over, then you want to clear it up and move into that aspect of full acceptance. You don't do that out of a need, of course, because then it's counterproductive. If you do it out of a need, then you get frustrated at it not going the way that you expected. You put expectations and then boom, you're back in the mind. That whole aspect of expectation and needing it to be a specific way. But if you just tackle it on, whenever it pops up, in its rare instances, we'll say, or whenever that kind of pops up, or you kind of just want to tackle it on a good shot now, or a specific instance, okay? You you take it on knowing that as you do this process, including the clearing, the forgiveness aspect, you as you do it, you realize that, okay, next time the thought will not come back with that same kind of emotion, that same kind of intensity, because you've already reasoned it out. And watch the future times, it'll barely pop up. It won't pop up. And that's a cool strategy for that kind of stuff. Yet you don't necessarily go seek out traumas to unearth, and that's the balance of it all. You don't necessarily go at it aggressively, make a hit list. At times it could be good, but at times you don't necessarily take it on as that process, and you'll find your own balance to it. Ultimately, you'll find your own balance to it. And you'll kind of start understanding this subtle nuance between, okay, I want to take this on, let's clear this up, or let me just have fun creating new things and creating new objectives and see what goes on afterward. You kind of land on your stumbling blocks as you do so from time to time. And this is where, again, there's more growth to it. But it's not a hunt, if you know what I mean. It's not a hunt for, okay, what do I need to fix? Let me work on that. What do I need to fix? Let me work on that. There's a unique balance to it. And it's again a very personal mix of these approaches, of these two approaches. You know what you kind of want to tackle on, but you're not overzealous about it. It's going to happen. Just setting up the intention is going to give you that easy cheat code. I win. process that's already started. So that's actually really nice to consciously know when tackling on these things, because then you put less pressure on yourself. And guess what? The process just gets done quite quickly. Quite. So, and the it's like soon as you'll notice, and it's kind of really funky when you think about it, you'll retrace back. There's going to be one point where you'll look back at some of the stuff that you've kind of held on for too long, and you'll be laughing because it's like, oh shit, yeah, once I took that on, a couple of weeks after, it was just gone. Or even less, maybe even a couple of days. It depends on your, again, the kind of flow you have with that process. If you think you need it to be a certain way, it's going to take a while because the mind's involved and it doesn't really go as smoothly. It's all a balance. It's really cool. Also, in that aspect of forgiveness, there's it becomes easier. Like it'll become much more gradual, as easy as pie, because eventually you start getting into the understanding that everything kind of has its place. The feeling of separation kind of pushes you to a like the understanding of that feeling of separation kind of shows you and pushes you in the direction that you understand that you're part of all. So enough time being paid attention to that feeling of separation gives you this, it kind of steers you towards healing it, but eventually you kind of get the beat that okay, wait, whoa, you're not feeling separated from anyone because you're part of all as a soul. So what begins to happen is the mind consciously starts to understand that, and that then effectively you've kind of steered the mind into the direction of just going, hey, think about all, think about all, think about all, gradually over and over. So after a while it kind of naturally becomes a, oh yeah, all right, part of all. Like you don't necessarily, and that's practice and repetition, of course, and you got to be careful because there's counter practice and counter repetitions, such as you watch a lot of footage about people just fighting and such. And of course, there's no context being explained. So you kind of get, the mind kind of gets back into that way of thinking and feeling. But, you take some time, spend some time out, do the inner work, whichever method kind of works for you. Just stepping out of that and just looking within and understanding like so much context, nuances going on within that it can't really be explained that easily. And you don't fall back into those habits or thinking such ways or taking habits from shows like that. You know what I mean? You just begin to slowly and carefully go, all right, part of all, part of all, part of all. I get it. Part of all. Context, part of all. Uh, it just becomes a momentum. It's just practicing it versus the counter practice. It's see it as like one big gauge and you're leaning on one side versus another and you're just kind of gradually leaning a bit more on the other where you want to lean, of course. Yeah. Gauge might be a bit too linear, but it's a basic analogy. Something that's a bit interesting and that just came up out the blue was this aspect of taking your word, taking our words much more seriously, but not in the way that we were indoctrinated early on. No, this time in a much more honest, loving, passive, playful, fun way. And kind of countering that nature because we've seen the swing of morality pass on both sides, both left and right, in our lifetime multiple times, and we kind of eventually get a feel for how it would kind of feel to be in the middle. As this aspect of, being honest, allowing yourself to be honest, allowing everyone else to be honest, just keeping that in mind, and just rolling with it, having fun with it, being completely open and honest. And here's the interesting thing that kind of pops up two little sub nuances that kind of need to be understood when saying that, because it depends on the degree perceived of open honesty and such, and also the degree or the depth known. to a person, and also the context of a person. So there's multiple factors to it. It's kind of nutty when you consider it. Yet, yeah, when you start kind of looking at the back and forth throughout the age, the way certain things were imposed, and you kind of understand why, to a certain degree, at times, the generation's kind of jaded with this aspect of, oh, fun loving type of stuff and blah, blah, blah. Because to a certain degree, there was a good intention early on by, prior generation or entourage of shoving it down our throats without necessarily understanding the nuances within and also balance. And then the opposite happened as well. You know, let's just say fuck it. Um, but, pushing it even further. Eventually you kind of go, well, there's a balance to it. And you might as well speak your mind, speak truthfully, speak honestly. But also just play with it. Don't take it too seriously. Don't, take things too seriously. Just play with it. And you start applying that to, I don't know, practically everything. Because, hey, same goes for your craft. After a while, you just get into the state where it's just, yeah, you just play. You just create. You just play. There's no stances. It's really interesting. The type of stuff that will just come true you at that state. When you're focused on that with pure positive intention, that's why, you wipe out that resentment or whatever anxiety the computer has, those computer viruses of your mind, whenever those. That's why at times, once you clean, if it comes back often, you clean it up and then booyah, you're on that trip, you're on that road. And you're just excited for the next day because it's like, oh shit, I'm about to create some cool shit. Let's go. And you wake up early. Or you don't even mind if you kind of wake up at that random time at 3 in the morning or 4. Just happens. You just wake up and it's like, huh, yeah, what the fuck? Look at the clock, 4:44, and you're like, huh, okay. And then, sometimes you just go back to bed. But hey, sometimes you'll just pop up that day and just wake up and just, yeah, okay, I'm pumped. Let's go. Let's create. Have fun. It's fucking funny how that can work. Man. Right. There was an earlier, even larger thought to that. What I just blurred out. Um, okay, taking things a bit more seriously. The honesty is a really, well, boom, great stuff. Add to it. There is also the aspect of, how do you say, a sense of, crap, I can't necessarily make it out. It's, okay, right. A sense of pure accountants. Okay, this is getting tricky and this is going a tad bit further down the rabbit hole, but you might as well give it a shot, and why not? It could be an interesting perspective to check. Um, Thinking about b- the mind body spirit connection, and you understand what's been said in multiple texts, the aspect of being the creator, a spawn of the creator, all one soul, all connected. So, okay, you push that even further. You kind of go, okay, well, creation. You add some quantum physics to it, as well as the aspect of the observer effect. And I know there's no real connections to it literally, but you kind of understand this aspect that as you observe, you create. Everything that comes in your field of view is kind of like a creation in your existence, in the context of your existence. Everything is a creation. The way that you placed your bed, your towel, in a way, everything is kind of like a creation. You've placed it there, thus created that situation, that event, that scene. Um, you, in a way, let's say you haven't really kept up with certain uh, limiting beliefs. Well, inadvertently, you have created that situation by having those limited beliefs, or the experience that you have. It's feels a tad bit wonky to say because it's like, well, you didn't necessarily choose it, but you're having it. Yet understanding the point that you're in now, just disconnecting from the brain, you see it non-duality. You kind of go, yeah, yeah, okay, I see how it helped me get to this point. And again, continual cyclical aspect of consciousness. Wow. Okay, but still. Ah. Okay, I'm stuck on that. Maybe not. Okay, so everything that you kind of bring is a creation. Okay, everything that you kind of do, everything that you kind of set up, everything that you perceive is a creation. Even the mind chatter is a creation because you can listen to the mind chatter and think you're involved with it, or you can listen from the outside, and that's a totally different experience that you've created by basically looking at the mind chatter from an observer's point of view, not an outsider's point of view. That would fuck with the mind even further. Don't don't do outsider. Observer. You observe what the mind is saying. You're outside the mind, so outsider in that sense, but not in a complete outsider sense. So it's kind of funny. It's really kind of funny when you think about it that way, and it's like, oh yeah, right. If I go in a specific situation, what I think about the situation, I create this kind of experience. I create the mood as well, depending on what I think about it. What's my current running thought pattern and focus pattern? What do I focus on? Everything that's really fucking cool? Everything that's a lot of fun? Or am I focusing on nitpicking, and look at the momentum one thing creates over another? So when you start seeing it that way, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I kind of want to take that to heart. But don't stress. You do not stress. That's doing the opposite. That's the brain just going, I need to do better. And it's like, no, no, that's an old way of thinking. You're at the right spot. You always are. It's like an attitude can shift in a split moment in a way. If we're talking about completely honestly, it can shift in a split moment, but holding it is a challenge. So let's say if you do improv, the tech I talk about, you start doing a bit of improv ad libbing um, about something that you kind of want to work on. In that second, you already got it. Asking you shall receive. You already got it. Booyah. Now, holding it is your own practice. And that's where, sometimes the mind's going to try to strike back. I go, but look at this memory, but look at that. But, you're going to start feeling the feeling of separation once that comes up. And then you kind of go, bam, stop. And you do your work. But then you go back to your ideas. You just go back to playing where it's all at. And yeah, eventually dives into, okay, well, what can I do? What's really fun and what's going to give to other people at the same time? And you'll hit jackpot every fucking time. The only thing that's in the way is just the mind, sometimes. So once you get good at this whole separation thing, meaning spotting the separation feeling, you have a much more of a um, precise counter reaction to whatever the mind's going to bring up. And at that point, you're just level grinding that problem. um, it's so fast too. It's really fucking cool. It all loops around, man. It really all loops around. I fucking love this. It becomes easier and simpler every time you kind of repeat it, but you notice it all comes back to the same, kind of like a same essence. It's not necessarily something you can fully describe with words without having like one heck of a long attempt to describe it, but can be made. I'm pretty sure that we'll find a way, like humanity will find a way. A couple of years. Hey, every generation discovers new. So now that we're all kind of like fully, we're in this aspect of being fully connected or much more connected with each other, and then much more connected with ourselves. The co op gameplay that's going to be happening over the next few years is going to be phenomenal. It's going to be fucking phenomenal. I'm talking about millions player server co-op type of deal mindset, various countries just pooling in that information, just go, yeah, let's go, let's try this. Shit, the aspect of interconnectivity and all that is just gonna be fucking amazing. The interactions, all of it is just gonna be fucking amazing. Shit, it's gonna be great. Like the more people kind of disconnect with the feeling of separation and kind of just realize this whole thing, it's like, wow. The co-op that kind of brought us to this point was fucking amazing too. And now imagine that doubled, tripled times 100,000 maybe. Like, wow. And you see, the only thing that's kind of like the one last thing that's kind of like just itching at us is just realizing that and not necessarily um, wasting, kind of like wasting time bitching about each other. That'll go out naturally too, but that being a big one. And just, hey, whatever happened in the past, cyclical aspect of it all. Different levels of consciousness all brought us to this point. Each and every event creating a ripple of influences through various people, various countries, various places, having their own variations on that initial event and its understandings from the various granular perceptions of various people, creating even more inspiring from that same source, but with its own variation, straight up being something new or always being something new by default. So it's like you start looking at the ripple of things, and yeah, you don't necessarily need to see it all. You just kind of see it conceptually. Hell, just musical influences, inspiration in music or video games. You start looking at that and understand the same kind of thing happened with knowledge and as well as manners, mannerisms and such. And you start seeing, hey, the aspect of the, of fucking hitting your neighbor every day, or invading another country, stuff like that. You start noticing the ripples of various events, and but also both macro and micro. You don't try to make it a whole thing or be too granular, but just general sense of the macro and micro. And you start feeling, right, okay, right, all's been happening in the due time, in the right time. I can't judge backward. It's been pointless having that kind of issue. And if that's brought up in history class, well, maybe it's something to change, please. It's like you can't just look backwards and say, oh man, those people were backwards. And it's like, well, yeah, that was a level of consciousness at the time. Of course, not enough questions were asked to change things at that time. Eventually it happened. Sometimes it's not even just question asking. Sometimes it's just, okay, fuck it. The pot boils and then causes an elastic effect where it goes over to another. All of that, the fun complexity of history, man. That eventually, once you take the time to do the word jargon, as I call it, but let's call it a better name, much more of a lovely name, just going into the entirety of it, or as much as you can, as deep as you can. Well, eventually it becomes more simple over time and repetition, and you're able to go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and just appreciate more and more and more and more and more the all that transpired to bring us here, and just in a natural feeling way. But again, repetition, man. It's our cheat codes. Repetition. Actually, wait, it's our level grinding mode. We got cheat codes, but we gotta level grind them. Level grind with them. You know, you add them both together, do that in your VR suit, and there you go. Man, this is fun. Oh, so much fucking fun, and I'm feeling so fucking appreciative of all the source material I've read to understand this, and it's like countless. But every piece of it just helped understanding more and more about that state, that flow state that you can just straight up apply into practically everything. And apply that to understanding wisdom and doing inner working for a bit, again with balance, and it's just, wow, holy fuck. So yeah, man, I gotta give a ping to that beer for whatever happened here. I just wanted a rhyme. It's got nothing to do with a beer, but yeah, I just want to give a ping to that. And here's hoping that we can just do our own shit because I want to start traveling now. Fucking pull down the gates! I'm still imagining the Resident Evil fucking movie gates. It's just a virus. Keep the gates up! Build a wall! Oh, fuck, man. This is the only thing I got in my mind. The Resident Evil fucking wall that they had in the movies. Those live action movies, man. I find myself appreciating, giving appreciation to that. Hey, fuck it. That's inspiration right there. Things to do, things not to do. That leads to more things that you would rather do. And not saying not to do, not preferred. See, clarity. Already clarifying. It's that I not prefer them. He's got the right to do whatever he wants. I would just prefer something else. And thank you for reminding me. And then it's like, yeah, thanks. So I don't get to be a jackass, and he gets to do his work. Paul W.S. Anderson did some cool stuff too. You gotta give the guy some credit, man. A lot of credit too. Fuck, some of his early works, kick ass. No, please don't do Resident Evil 7. Or maybe, I don't know. Fucking derailed. Well, fuck it. You just play around with consciousness. Alright, I'm gonna stop it there, or else it's gonna extend to a 2-hour one that'll never be brought out. Never.